Hello, good evening and welcome back. So good news for all libertarian-minded people who have disdain for socialists. So all of you, I'm sure. KFC, Nando's and Pret lower prices after VAT cut. The main thing to focus on here is, of course, the VAT hiatus until the 12th of January. So they're putting a number here, which is misleading, I would say, as it is all conjecture. A £4 billion cut in VAT has come into force, allowing firms in the food, drink and hospitality sectors to slash prices. Nando's, Pret a Manger and McDonald's are among firms to promise reductions after the Chancellor ordered a temporary VAT cut from 20% to 5%. Now, you may remember a few years back it was 17%, and of course before that lower, and during the 2008 recession, they also did a similar dip during that time. And what we're all really hoping for is to say, okay, cool, so you're going to reduce the amount of tax, and why is that? Oh, so you're going to get people to spend more. Well, kind of. There are two competing trains of thought as to the intent behind this, and then also what the results have been from the businesses. So one is to say, hey, we need more people coming back to our stores. People tend to get into patterns and they like to keep those patterns. It needs quite a big change in order for people to change the habits that they've become accustomed to. Therefore, although they might have been used to going out as they had been, when the lockdown came into force, of course, people didn't want to go out as much, in which case, now the new habit is staying in. So how do we change that habit? Well, we incentivize the actions that we want, which is to make it cheaper, or cheap enough, hopefully, in order for them to come out and see us and patronize our businesses more frequently. And therefore, any savings in the VAT, we're going to pass on to the customers so that we get more people coming through our doors. At that point, they will develop the patterns and the habits of coming to see us, at which point we can increase prices again, and it won't seem too harsh because the change in pattern of spending a bit more will be less objectionable than the change in pattern of not coming out at all. That's the plan behind that. Conversely, the competing train of thought is to say businesses have had a hard time, so the cut in VAT won't affect the prices, and instead the increase in profit will go directly to the businesses, which will help them to recoup the losses that they've had from the lockdown. Now, funny thing about that is that with any possible disaster, economic disaster essentially, with anything that would possibly take out a business, and this could be technological innovation as well, that would also be an economic disaster for businesses, you'll find there'll be newcomers in the game who didn't exist before the disaster, but do exist now. So they haven't been affected by the horrendous situation that longer businesses have found themselves in which case they don't have losses to recoup. I mean, sure, they might have some angel investors or other sorts of investors, in which case they will have the debt and need to repay their investors by all means. But they won't have the debt that any of the more established companies have, in which case the bigger companies will need savings to rely on, and they can't rely on being able to have their prices higher than the competition if they're offering the same or similar product, because they're going to lose clientele to the people who are offering the same service or similar for cheaper. But yes, of course, there are such a multitude of different things that you can't really say that two things are the same, that there are far too many that go into it. Even a classic example of saying something like Waitrose versus Asda, it's like, well, sure, Waitrose products are more expensive than Asda, but given the whole, let's say the other people that it attracts is that kind of culture, as well as how you're treated in store, perhaps that is worth more to you than the difference in cost of the products. Because, hey, Waitrose know their target audience, as does Asda, of course. And therefore they can charge more for exactly the same product because the things surrounding that are substantially different, and therefore people are happier to pay more for that experience. The same goes for pubs as well, to say, well, you can buy that beer in a supermarket and it's cheaper than in a pub, so why on earth are you spending more to get it in a pub? And I don't mean things on cask, I mean just bottles or cans. Well, it's because of the atmosphere within the pub, and you're paying for that experience, and experiences are better than the materials, in which case you're happy to pay that. So, coming back to the point in question, if companies are trying to keep those profits in order to recoup their losses, chances are there's going to be a gap in the market for somebody who doesn't have the debts and the large overheads and the amount to repay to be able to then sneak their way in, use their leverage and their positioning in order to then profit a much greater amount because they don't have to worry about paying debts back. So, with any change in this, of course, the more government gets involved, the less business innovation you're going to get because too many people are uncertain of how the regulations are going to affect them in the future, and therefore the less the government is involved, the more innovation you're going to see because people are happier to take that risk because the governmental regulatory law side of things is a more stable and predictable environment, at which point it then comes down to the sociology of interactions instead of the legal side, which is far more irrational than mob behavior, which tends to be a lot more predictable. So, as they say, many companies are expected to use the windfall to shore up finances hit by the lockdown rather than cut prices, which could be dangerous for anybody who's looking to take a quick dive in order to capitalize on this. I say that the Treasury estimates households could save £160 per year on average, but not all firms will pass on the benefit. Yes, that if you're spending more, you're saving more, although that's a bit of a false equivalency on the offset, of course. And you might think, well, 15% is quite a big change. Why is it only £160? Well, that is because the value-added tax isn't applicable on all products. The necessities, as has been termed, which includes some things which maybe shouldn't be there, they don't have value-added tax on. And if you really want to take a deep dive into the different tax rates, then not only do you have the difference between hospitality sectors like cafes and restaurants and pubs compared to grocery stores and supermarkets, but on top of that, you've got different forms of food preparation. So selling bread versus sliced bread, or pre-made sandwiches versus the ingredients. These kind of things can actually have a substantial difference in price because of tax added to food which has undergone that preparation. So it is incredibly convoluted and far too much information for this video to cover. So, as they say, several restaurants and food-to-go chains have announced price cuts. So you've got Nando's, Pret A Manger, KFC. McDonald's is recommending its franchisees cut prices. Wetherspoon is to reduce prices on meals, coffee and soft drinks, and reduce prices on popular beers, which is slightly different for alcohol tax and tobacco tax as well. It's slightly different than the regular VAT. And as well, Starbucks will pass the discount on the coffee as well, as a quick glance, if you will. So they mention what VAT is, but you don't have to pay VAT on most supermarket food, children's clothing, newspapers, and magazines. Don't need it on newspapers because they're definitely necessary. Does that then mean that there should never be VAT on internet usage because you can use that to get news as well? Or anything that's printed on paper, in which case you shouldn't have to spend it on books? Where are they drawing the line? It's arbitrary, as a lot of things to do with government are. If you don't want something that's arbitrary, you've got to look into something like universal preferable behaviour by the Stefan Molyneux pioneers, of course. And then the non-aggression principle, things that can be black and white, and they're very straightforward. So non-aggression principle, if somebody isn't causing harm to you or about to, then you can't do anything to them. The speech is not violence. That kind of thing, very straightforward. If somebody wants you to do something and you don't want to do it, then fair enough, it's not going to happen. But it can't be they want to do something, therefore they'll use force to take it from you, because that's what taxes are, hence why he is an anarchist. He is actually fully congruent with his anarchist perspective. So as we see the UK standard VAT rate over time, including the 08 dip, and for my adult life has been 17.5%. That's what I know. Had to work out. So PubChain Weatherspoon said it would use the tax break to help fund lower prices on some of its most popular beers, but this drew criticism from Tom Stainer, Chief Executive of the Campaign for Real Ale, CAMRA, and James Cole, the Chief Executive of the Society of Independent Brewers, SIBA. Like all pubs, Weatherspoon will not be able to benefit from a VAT reduction on beer sales, and they say it is disappointing to see them potentially mislead customers into believing cheaper beer prices are as a direct result of the Chancellor's measures. But, sure, but it just seems like, hey, Tim, we're disappointed with you because you're not taking credit for a nice thing you're doing. We're disappointed that you're doing something nice and giving somebody else the credit and saying that you can do something nice because of somebody else. We would be less disappointed if you took the full credit and responsibility yourself and demanded praise from people. So as far as criticism goes, I would be more than happy to receive that criticism. So we're disappointed in you because you're giving credit to other people. Okay. Cool. But I bet those people want to do business with me in future and it's helping us both out. I'm happy with that. But Weatherspoon has produced promotional posters to advertise food price cuts. Let's not get into stereotyping here. Including one called Sunak Specials and another called Dishy Rishi. As Tim Martin said, as he wanted tax equality between pubs, restaurants and supermarkets for many years. Very straightforward. He said supermarkets pay no VAT on food sales and pubs pay 20%. Supermarkets pay about 2 pence per pint of business rates and pubs pay about 20% because of everything else that goes into it. It's supposed to be a luxury instead of a necessity. There are different gradations of that. But should you let the business decide for themselves? Most certainly yes. He said a VAT reduction will help pubs and restaurants reverse this trend, creating more jobs, helping high streets and eventually generating more tax income for the government. That is the key point. We are so hopeful that they're going to go, oh, we've lowered the tax rates, but we've increased the tax revenue. Exactly like Singapore, Dubai, Japan have seen. Exactly like those countries. If they go, oh, we're not going to be taxing people at such a high rate because we want them to spend more. Oh, they're spending so much more on exactly what they want to that we're getting more tax revenue. Wouldn't that be nice? That the government directly takes a lower proportion of your income but is able to generate more because you're deciding where you wish to spend your money. Wouldn't that be nice? You actually get to choose where your money goes, what you support, and by choosing where your money goes, that means choosing where your work goes. That money is a unit of work, essentially. So you're working, you're able to do something arduous of whatever level in order to support who you wish to support. Very, very good. So lowering the tax gives you that freedom, which also means if people want to support something, they will. And if they don't wish to support it, then they won't. Very straightforward. It's like voting, but it's really putting your money where your mouth is. It's investing into everything instead of just voting, which everybody gets equally. It's like, hey, no. If you work harder, you get a greater decision on where your work goes. The more work you do, the more choice you have in who you support with your work. And yes, you might say, what about people who get it from inheritance? So well, that's only about 15% of millionaires. And within 3 generations, almost always it's all gone. So I rule them out pretty quickly because they don't know what they're doing with money anyway. So they're going to lose it. But as he finishes off, lower VAT and tax equality will eventually lead to lower prices, more employment, busier high streets and more taxes for the government. And yes, it's the higher tax revenue that we're all looking for because that makes the government happier and the people happier as well. You get taxed less, which means you get to choose where your money goes, and they get more money, which makes them happier because they're always looking for things to spend it on. So that's some good news for you. It's only until 12th of January, but hopefully it's an opportunity to prove that the concept works and it'll last longer. So as always, until next time, have a good one.